Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak here today. As mentioned, I'll give a short, brief overview over the European Commission's policy and practice in this area. I have two disclaimers. First, these are my personal remarks, not necessarily those of the European Commission. And secondly, I'm a lawyer, so I'm not an economist, so there's limits to what I can say and comprehend. And so I'll limit myself to explaining what the Commission is doing in this area, and then I leave to Dennis and Patrick to explain what we should be doing. So with that, we can start. So what is a non-horizontal merger? Well, there are two types. Either it's a vertical merger, so that's a merger at different levels of the supply chain between actual or potential supplier customers. And then there's the broader category of conglomerate mergers where you don't have substitutes but closely related markets, complementary or same product range. And I think it's universally recognized that non-horizontal mergers are less likely to impede effective competition than horizontal mergers. First, they do not entail a direct loss of competition between players in the same market. And second, they do provide substantial scope for efficiencies. Nevertheless, there are, I hope it's recognized, there are circumstances where non-horizontal mergers may lead to a significant lessening of competition. It may change the ability and incentive for the merging party to compete and also for competitors in ways that may harm consumers. The big question is, of course, when, how, and how to prove that. And as mentioned, the European Commission has learned some lessons from the past. We have the infamous cases of GE Honeywell, Tetra Laval, Schneider Legrand. I happen to be the legal counsel for the European Commission in both GE Honeywell and Tetra Laval. I was not involved at the stage at DG Competition. I was at the legal service of the European Commission. So I do know a little bit about these cases. And these concern mainly conglomerate effects. That is the combination of a range of products or portfolio of products that may create the possibility for certain exclusionary conduct that could in time disadvantage or foreclose competitors and ultimately result in their exit from the market. And the conduct that was concerned is generally concerned is bundling or tying or some sort of limitation on interoperability. We see that in some of the recent cases, thereby in a way leveraging a dominant position from one market to another market. And that first type, the bundling tying, was the issue in the GE Honeywell case. And I'm not going to go into detail, but just to say that this case concerned, GE's practice of using GCAS, which is the world's largest leasing company and purchaser of aircraft, to strengthen GE's position. And there was a concern that the merged entity could engage in sort of bundling of various complementary products that would in the short term lead to price reductions, that would shift demand away from rivals, that wouldn't have the financial strength to respond. Rivals would lose market share, they would invest less in R&D, they would gradually become marginalized, and as a result of this chain of events, the merger would ultimately strengthen GE's dominance and lead to harm to consumers. Now, of course, there are a number of assumptions that has to be made in this reasoning, and as we know, the court was not persuaded that the Commission had met its burden of proof in this particular case. We did, in the end, win the case, but on, I think, a small horizontal overlap in the small market for marine gas turbines or something like that. So it wasn't a great victory. And there was quite a lot of controversy and criticism also from across the Atlantic. And I think the challenge in these type of cases is to be able to distinguish what is genuine efficiencies, price reductions from what may be strategic pricing behavior aimed at driving rivals out. And one question that was raised in these cases is it appropriate at all to use merger control to deal with abusive conduct ex ante, or should one rather wait and see whether the merged entity will actually engage in this conduct because we have Article 102? Of course, the counter-argument to that is that Article 102 is not necessarily as effective as a pre-merger control would be. So, and just to say something on the judgment in Tetra Laval, there the court confirmed that in principle the Commission may pursue these conglomerate effects theories, but it did require the Commission to meet a very high evidentiary standard. And the reason being, as the court said, that conglomerate mergers are generally neutral or beneficial for competition. So the court said that we have to show that the transaction in all likelihood would lead to competitive harm, or at least we need to produce very convincing evidence. And another aspect that the court picked up on was that the Commission cannot presume that firms will engage in unlawful behavior because, of course, we have Article 102, and one must take that into account when weighing the incentives for firms to actually engage in this type of conduct. So anyway, these cases indeed led to a discussion and then a discussion paper and then the adoption of the non-horizontal merger guidelines in 2007, which then consolidates the previous Commission practice, incorporates the principles contained in these judgments, and set out an analytical framework that the Commission will pursue when assessing these type of mergers. And as was also mentioned, in any event, since these cases, the Commission has taken a very cautious attitude in assessing risk stemming from bundling strategies, and we haven't challenged really a conglomerate merger in recent years with the exception of Intel McAfee. I would probably say that the Commission is cautious overall because if you look at that statistics that was mentioned, I think on average we actually only prohibit one merger per year. So I think that's cautious. So the guidelines, they do confirm, as I said, that non-horizontal mergers are less likely to raise competition issues than horizontal mergers, that these type of mergers provide substantial efficiencies. And with regard to conglomerate mergers, it even says that in the majority of circumstances there shouldn't be a problem. On the other hand, I think this is important, there is no presumption of legality. It's rather a balance of probability standards that applies, because we, of course, have to prove the case either way. We either have to prove that there is a significant impediment to effective competition, or we have to prove that there is not. And we have to adopt a recent decision going either way, and that decision may be subject to appeal. And of course, we have seen that also clearance decisions are challenged before the court and sometimes overturned. And I think that's important, and that might be a procedural aspect which is certainly different in the US. The guidelines also states that we would take an integrated assessment of efficiencies, weighing possible anti-competitive effects against pro-competitive effects benefiting consumers. And we will assess then these various chains of cause and effect with a view to determining what is more likely. So with regard to vertical mergers that are also mentioned in the guidelines, the main concern is foreclosure. So either input foreclosure or customer foreclosure. And as regards to the framework set out, it's a three-step analysis. So we would investigate the ability to foreclose, the incentive to do so, and the possible harm to consumers. But of course, in practice, this is often examined together. We would, of course, also analyze whether these issues are merger-specific or not. So on the ability, we would require a significant degree of market power in an upstream market, and one must also consider then counter strategies. And I think market power is unlikely. It's mentioned in the guidelines, unlikely if market shares are below 30%. On the incentives, it's a question, of course, to seek to determine whether it would be profitable for the firm to engage in this, and that may depend on, it's a trade-off between profits lost in an upstream market and potential gains from expanding sales downstream. An incentive to foreclose may be higher, of course, if profits upstreams are low, if there's possibility to expand downstream. And in assessing these likely incentives, we can also take into account strategies adopted in the past, or, for example, if we find internal documents, business plans that describes what is likely to happen. And then, of course, the last step would be the likely impact on effective competition. And here there are mainly two scenarios. The merger may raise rivals' cost, thereby causing an upward pressure on rivals' prices, which may in turn allow the merged entity to raise price. Or it may lead to raised entry barriers. And in particular, if foreclosure necessitates a two-level entry. And then again, that needs to be balanced against the efficiencies brought about by the merger, and we know that these types of mergers may indeed lead to considerable efficiencies, internalization of double markups, reduction of inventory costs, or alignment of incentives. And these are not just a mere checklist that we would tick the boxes, but as I said, we would make an integrated assessment weighing the potential harm against the efficiencies. And the ultimate question is indeed, would there be a significant impediment to effective competition? And as I said, we need to prove that with convincing evidence either way. So I was going to mention a few cases, kind of examples. I think the first one, I can be very brief, but I believe that Patrick may mention these MAPS cases. I think I would just say these two cases are a good illustration of the Commission's approach. It shows the importance of economic analysis in this area. It also shows that the Commission may apply quite advanced econometric techniques in assessing the incentive and the effects of a merger. And in these particular cases, of course, the outcome was positive because, in fact, what was found was that the merger might lead to a small decline in average prices, and then taking account of the efficiencies, there would be no problem at all. But the cases show that an empirical evaluation may be key in responding to the question at hand, whether indeed the net outcome would be harm or not. Of course, it always depends on whether data is available, and I think in these cases they were available to a different degree, but it was shown that an empirical assessment was still possible. And it's always important also to take into account specific industry facts, and that was done in these cases. And then I'll just finish by mentioning three more recent cases, all in a sense concerning some sort of interoperability issues. And the first one is Intel McAfee. You may know Intel, of course, has a strong position in chips for computers and chipsets. They wanted to buy McAfee, a developer of security solutions, and these are then conglomerate products. Concerns were raised in a first phase of either a possible bundling of chips with security solutions, or vertically a denial of interoperability for other security providers, and possible effects that could have on Intel's competitors if McAfee solutions no longer were compatible with theirs. Now here in this case, Intel offered remedies already in first phase. They committed to ensure access to all necessary information to use functionalities in the same way as it would provide that to McAfee. It committed not to actively impede competitor security solutions from running on Intel's chips, and not to hamper operations of McAfee security solutions on other chips. So that was in a way a balance to ensure that the efficiencies of the mergers could still be preserved and yet keeping access open to competitors. A similar case, ARM, G&D, Gemalto was a joint venture between ARM, which is then a semiconductor IP supplier that produces IP for chips in mobile devices. And it concerned development of security solutions, trusted execution environments to ensure you have security on your mobile device. And there were concerns raised in first phase again, vertical concerns that ARM could degrade interoperability with its own trust zone hardware extension for these trusted execution environments. Again, ARM committed in first phase to resolve any such concerns by offering to ensure access to all necessary information for this architecture to other providers, and not to design its intellectual property to degrade performance of third-party security solutions. And these two cases can then be contrasted with another recent case, which is the M-Commerce joint venture. This was a joint venture in the UK between Telefonica, Vodafone, and Everything Everywhere in the field of mobile commerce, mobile payments. The concerns raised in first phase was that the joint venture and its parents may have the technical and commercial ability and incentive to block future competitors from offering their own mobile wallet services to customers in the UK, or to degrade the quality of these competing mobile wallets. That case went into second phase, and after an in-depth investigation, it was unconditionally cleared. And the reasons for that was that this is a nascent sector. This joint venture was just one of several initiatives in this area, and the Commission is keen on promoting innovation and ensure that markets remain open. So I think if you compare these and to conclude, the outcomes rather speak, I think, in favor of the generally pro-competitive nature of these type of transactions. Because, of course, if you give commitments in first phase, you do so based on only serious concerns, whereas, of course, we, in the M-Commerce case, after more in-depth investigation, rebutted such concerns. I think it also showed that the guidelines can be applied using a wide range of different techniques, empirical analysis, etc. So, to conclude, overall, of course, we often see complaints from competitors or customers in vertical cases in these type of cases, and we, of course, should be wary of that. There may be reasons behind such complaints. It also shows, I think, that economic analysis plays a crucial role in order to determine the real likelihood of effects, negative effects of a merger, and the importance of gathering good data early on in an investigation. The guidelines, I think, provide a useful framework, a structured approach, these 3 steps in analysis. It's also a flexible framework where we can apply a variety of empirical methods to validate or not a theory of harm. And of course, it is an integrated approach rather than a mere checklist where we also take into account efficiencies. Thank you.